In a quiet, sun-scorched village, untouched by modern progress, a young boy named Kimo was growing up with dreams far bigger than the dusty paths he walked every day. The village had no electricity, no paved roads, and definitely no lawyers. Most of the children there had never even seen a courtroom, let alone imagined someone from their world stepping into one. But Kimo was different. Even from a young age, he had a fire in his eyes and a mind that questioned everything around him. His father worked as a night watchman at a nearby maize factory, often returning home at sunrise, worn and silent. His mother was a farmer who spent her days under the sun tending to cassava and okra. They had no extra money, no family connections, no books in the house, only dreams and silence. Yet, Kimo found a way to learn. He would walk to the town market on Sundays, collecting discarded newspapers, old magazines, and torn textbooks left behind by travellers. Anything with words, he read. Anything with rules, he studied. Kimo built a desk out of old crates beneath the shade of an aging mango tree. That spot became his classroom, his courtroom, and his sanctuary. Children from the village gathered around him, not because they believed in his dream, but because they found his make-believe sessions amusing. Kimo would stand with a stick in his hand as a gavel, mimicking court proceedings he had read about. He taught them about basic rights, what to do when someone takes your land, how to settle disputes, how to speak with dignity. The kids laughed, mimicked him, and called him Mr. Judge. Adults dismissed him with chuckles. He thinks he's a lawyer. But one day, something unexpected happened. A journalist from the city was passing through the village on a human interest story about rural education. He spotted the crowd beneath the mango tree and stopped to observe. He watched Kimo defending a pretend client, citing laws from memory, and improvising with such confidence that it didn't feel like a game. Impressed, the journalist sat down with Kimo, asked him a few questions, and took a photo of his makeshift courtroom. Weeks later, an article was published in a national newspaper titled, "The Boy Who Thinks He's a Lawyer." The story went viral across the country. It sparked conversations about rural talent, forgotten potential, and education inequity. Donations began pouring into Kimo's village. NGOs sent books, solar lamps, and stationery. But the biggest miracle came when the local government, moved by the article, offered Kimo a full scholarship to attend the capital's prestigious School of Law. When the letter arrived, Kimo's hands trembled as he held it. The same villagers who once laughed were now clapping. His parents stood silently beside him, his father holding back tears, his mother whispering, "Go show them who you are." And just like that, the boy from nowhere began his journey to become someone the whole country would one day talk about. The capital city was nothing like Kimo had imagined. The buildings stretched like giants into the sky, traffic buzzed like endless bees, and the air felt thicker, with both noise and unfamiliarity. As he stepped through the towering gates of the prestigious university, carrying his single worn-out suitcase, Kimo immediately knew he didn't belong, or at least, that's how it felt. Everywhere he looked, students walked with the confidence of people who had grown up surrounded by books, debates, and dinner tables full of politics and privilege. They wore tailored suits, even to lectures. Their English flowed fast and polished, their accents sharp and practiced. Kimo's village tongue stuck out like a weed among roses. His accent was thick, his English was slow, careful, often broken. His shoes had been restitched 3 times. The first day, he introduced himself in class, and a few chuckles echoed from the back. By the end of the week, a popular student sarcastically dubbed him Barrister Bush. In the dormitory, his bunkmate refused to share notes, whispering to others, "This guy came from a mango tree courtroom. Let's see how far that takes him." One afternoon, while sitting alone at lunch, Kimo overheard a senior student smirking. "He'll drop out before midterms. Law is for lions, not lizards." He swallowed the pain. Pride didn't feed you here. Discipline did. Kimo avoided the library during peak hours. He felt too watched, too judged. Instead, he befriended the janitor, an old man named Musa, who let him study in the supply closet at night. Surrounded by mops, buckets, and cleaning chemicals, Kimo built his second makeshift study station. He kept his mother's voice in his head. Books don't know where you come from. They just wait for you to read them. He read old case files until his eyes burned. He rewrote legal definitions again and again until they rolled off his tongue like scripture. He practiced in front of a mirror, listening to how he sounded, adjusting one word at a time. One night, while returning from late study hours, he passed an open classroom and noticed someone watching him. Professor Amara, one of the most respected legal minds on campus. She had heard whispers of the village boy who wouldn't quit. That night, she called him in and asked, "Why here, Kimo?" He looked at her honestly. "Because the law doesn't know where I come from, and I want to know the law." She smiled gently. "Then you'll be fine. Real law isn't in language, it's in heart. And you have more heart than most of this campus." It was the first kindness he'd received since arriving. From that day forward, Kimo stopped trying to blend in. He walked the halls in his second-hand suit, spoke his careful English, and kept his head high. He wasn't here to impress. He was here to earn it. And deep inside, something unshakable had taken root. Not everyone saw it yet, but one day they would. As the final year approached, the buzz around campus wasn't about exams or grades. It was about the High Court internship program. Each year, the university selected a handful of top-performing law students to intern under real judges, in real courtrooms, on real cases. But among them, only one student would be granted the rare opportunity to assist in a live courtroom trial before a sitting High Court judge. It was the academic crown jewel, the path to clerkships, scholarships abroad, and fast-track careers. The list went up on a Friday morning. Students crowded around the bulletin board, elbowing for a glimpse. At the top of the page, in printed capital letters, Kimo Obina, assigned to Justice Mensah, Courtroom 3. The silence was immediate. Then murmurs. "Kimo? Seriously?" one voice whispered. "That has to be some diversity quota," another said. One classmate smirked. "Well, every circus needs a juggler." Kimo read his name again and again, unsure whether to feel proud or afraid. Justice Mensah was one of the country's most feared and respected judges, an old-school mind with little patience for anything outside perfection. Stories floated around campus about how even senior attorneys trembled in his courtroom. It was said he could spot weakness in a heartbeat and crush it without blinking. When Kimo entered the judge's chambers the following Monday, dressed in his best shirt and polished shoes, the room fell into a brief, uncomfortable silence. The judge looked up slowly from his papers and frowned. "You're the one from the village?" he asked, glancing at the name. "The mango tree advocate." Kimo nodded politely. "Yes, your lordship." Judge Mensah leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Why waste everyone's time?" Kimo didn't respond. He simply stood straight and waited. For the first week, he wasn't given a single legal document to review. Instead, he was asked to carry case files to clerks, pour tea for court guests, and organize law books by title and thickness. The other interns, especially those assigned to different judges, watched him like hawks, smiling behind his back. One of them started a betting pool. How many days until he gets pulled out? The most popular guess was 5. Inside the courtroom, Kimo was told to sit at the very edge of the bench, silently. He wasn't allowed to speak, wasn't asked for input, and wasn't even introduced by name. Still, he came in early every morning and left after everyone else. He memorized each case the judge was working on. He wrote summaries in his notebook, even though no one asked for them. At night, he studied Justice Mensah's old rulings, analyzing his logic, his tone, his patterns. He learned more in that silence than most did by speaking, and while the judge didn't speak to him unless necessary, there was a flicker in his eyes, one that noticed Kimo never flinched, never complained, never backed down. There was something about the boy's stillness that suggested a storm was quietly building, and in the coming days, that storm would finally be seen. The courtroom buzzed with whispers the morning a new case file landed on Judge Mensah's desk. It was thick, nearly twice the size of a typical trial folder, and sealed with a government stamp. Interns eyed it nervously. The heading read, Case number 77, HD, Widow Amanyako versus Duro Holdings Limited. Rumours spread quickly. The plaintiff was a grieving widow whose late husband had left behind ancestral farmland on the edge of the city. The defendant, a ruthless real estate tycoon with deep political connections, known for swallowing family plots and turning them into shopping malls. No intern wanted to touch it. It was too risky, too messy, too career-ending, as one whispered. The lawyers involved were already hand-picked. The widow's legal counsel was underfunded and overworked. Everyone expected the case to be dismissed quietly, with Duro Holdings walking away victorious. Kimo read the file when no one was looking. Something about it tugged at him. Maybe it was the way the widow's plea had been scrawled on lined paper, tucked inside the official documents. Or maybe it was the familiar tone of desperation, something he'd seen too often back home. The next morning, while serving tea in chambers, Kimo quietly asked, "Your Lordship, may I assist on the Nyako case?" Judge Mensah paused mid-sip, eyebrows raised. "You," he said sharply. "This isn't your tree back home, Mr. Kimo. This is a case of land, law, and lions. You really think you're ready to wrestle with tigers in wigs?" Kimo bowed his head respectfully. "I may not know tigers, sir, but I know land, and I know people." The judge didn't reply. He simply waved him off. But that night, Kimo secretly borrowed a copy of the case file from the clerk and began what would be the most intense nights of study in his life. He locked himself in Musa's janitor closet, surrounded by law books and a flickering solar lamp. He scoured archives about tribal inheritance laws, ancestral claims, and colonial land grants. He traced treaties signed before independence and rural land proclamations tucked deep in forgotten statutes. He read about the Land Disputes Act of 1963, which allowed family land to be transferred directly to surviving spouses, but had been buried under decades of newer urban legislation. After 4 nights without sleep, he found it. A forgotten provision in a 1971 decree, untouched by amendment, which allowed for automatic protection of indigenous land when ownership is challenged by non-native development entities. It wasn't often used, but it was still valid. This clause, if argued right, could protect the widow's land from being seized. He cross-referenced it with customary law. He even traced the original parliamentary speech made when the law was introduced. The logic was watertight. Kimo copied his findings, wrote a summary, and left it anonymously on the judge's desk. The next morning, Judge Mensah walked into court unusually quiet. When Kimo poured his tea, the judge didn't speak. But just as Kimo turned to leave, the judge said flatly, "You found something no one else did." Kimo stopped. "Prepare your notes. You're sitting in on the hearing. Don't speak yet." Kimo nodded, heart pounding. The case no one wanted had just become his silent battlefield. And though no one knew it yet, the outcome was about to shift, not through power or politics, but through the diligence of a boy who had once read newspapers under a mango tree. The day of the hearing arrived, and Courtroom 3 was filled to the brim. Journalists sat hunched in the back rows, whispering into their recorders. Law students filled every inch of the gallery, eager to see how the country's most feared judge would handle the infamous land case. At the front of the room, Duro Holdings' legal team stood tall, dressed in crisp suits, their expressions calm, almost smug. On the other side of the room sat Amanyako, the widow, frail, dressed in a faded head wrap and a simple cloth blouse, alone. Her lawyer had called in sick just an hour before the hearing, reportedly collapsing from stress. There was no replacement. The court clerk whispered nervously into Judge Mensah's ear, then announced, "Your Lordship, the plaintiff has no legal representation present." The judge tapped his gavel with practiced irritation. "Then the case is void. We'll have it struck." Before he could finish, a voice rose from the corner of the courtroom. "With the court's permission," said Kimo, standing calmly, "I have prepared her defense." The room turned. Dozens of eyes fell on him. There was silence for a heartbeat, then laughter, some soft, some loud. Even the Juro Holdings lawyer shook his head in amusement. "You," Judge Mensah said with a half smile, "you're wasting time." "I understand," Kimo replied, standing firm. "But I ask the court to consider that time is already wasted when the law is denied the chance to speak." Gasps. The room hushed. The judge leaned back, curious now. Before he could answer, Amar Nyako rose shakily from her seat. "He's the only one who listened," she said. "The only one who asked me what happened. Please, Your Lordship, let him speak." Judge Mensah studied Kimo. The boy's posture didn't waver. No shaking knees, no nervous sweat. Just calm, controlled breath, and a quiet fire behind his eyes. "One chance," the judge said. "And if you embarrass this court—" "I won't," Kimo said, with the certainty of someone who had lived this trial long before this day arrived. He stepped toward the plaintiff's desk. There was no fancy robe, no legal assistant beside him, just a stack of notes, hand-bound by string, and a heart full of purpose. As he stood and adjusted the lone microphone before him, the courtroom held its collective breath. This was no longer just a case about land. It had become something else entirely, a moment of reckoning. And the boy they once laughed at was about to speak into a silence they would never forget. Kimo stood behind the podium, the courtroom heavy with expectation. He took a breath, not to calm nerves, but to gather the weight of what this moment meant. He wasn't just speaking for the widow beside him. He was speaking for every unheard voice buried beneath the development deals and forgotten laws. "My lord," he began, his voice steady though not flawless. "The issue before this court is not only about land, it is about legacy." The courtroom remained silent. He continued, slowly, deliberately choosing each word. "This land belonged to Madame Nyako's family for generations. Before colonial fences were drawn, before title deeds were invented, before laws changed hands like currency." From his folder, he pulled out a yellowed page, laminated with care. This is a copy of the original land claim filed by her grandfather in 1949, filed under tribal trust agreements with the District Land Council. He held up another page. "Here is a 1971 provision, Section 12 of the Rural Land Security Act, which protects family-held indigenous land when challenged by non-native commercial entities." The Juro Holdings lawyer rose sharply. "Objection, Your Lordship. This clause is outdated, irrelevant to modern commercial law." Judge Mensah raised a finger without looking at him. "Sit down, counsel. I want to hear this." Kimo nodded respectfully and pressed on. "This land was never sold. It was never signed over. It was inherited. And under the law, even today, ancestral land cannot be acquired through silence or absence. It must be surrendered. And Madame Nyako never surrendered it. She buried her husband on that land. She raised her children there. She survived on it. It is not just a property, it is a story." He took a step forward. "But because she doesn't wear a suit or have political friends, her land was marked for demolition. Her voice dismissed, her rights forgotten. This courtroom has a choice today, not just to uphold a statute, but to remember what law was made for. Not the powerful, but the protected." He paused, then looked directly at the judge. "Your Lordship once said I was wasting time." The judge's eyes narrowed slightly. Kimo's tone didn't change. But I asked the court, what is more wasteful, a boy studying law under a mango tree, or a society that ignores the very laws meant to protect its most vulnerable? A hushed murmur moved through the crowd. He placed the final page down gently. I rest my case. And with that, he stepped back. Not a sound followed, not a cough, not a rustle of paper. The courtroom, once full of doubt and laughter, now sat still, frozen by the weight of words they never expected from the quietest man in the room. Judge Mensah said nothing. He simply stared not at the papers, but at Kimo. For in that moment, the law wasn't just being read, it was being remembered. After a tense recess, the courtroom doors creaked open and everyone filed back in. The widow clutched the edge of the table, her eyes wide but calm. Kimo stood beside her, hands behind his back, steady, quiet. The judge's chair remained empty for a moment longer than usual. Then finally, Judge Mensah entered, his robe flowing like a silent wave, face unreadable. He sat, adjusted his glasses, looked around the courtroom, letting the anticipation stew a moment longer. In the matter of Ammoniaco versus Duro Holdings, he began, this court has reviewed the presented arguments, documentation, and precedents cited. He paused again. While modern property law favours development and commerce, this court cannot, in good conscience, ignore the binding power of the 1971 Rural Land Security Act, nor dismiss the documented ancestral ownership presented today. He looked directly at the plaintiff's table. This court rules in favour of the plaintiff. Duro Holdings is ordered to cease all development activities and return ownership of the land to Madame Ammoniaco. A gasp filled the room. The widow clutched her chest and sat down quickly, overcome. Kimo didn't smile, didn't flinch. He simply bowed his head, a quiet exhale leaving his lungs. But Judge Mensah wasn't done. He turned fully toward Kimo now. Mr. Obina, he said, his voice lower, more personal. When you stood in this courtroom, I thought you were wasting time. A hush fell again. But I see now, you are time. You remind this institution what the law was built for, not speed, not status, but substance. He leaned forward slightly. You, Mr. Kimo Obina, are the future of law. The silence broke, with scattered applause that quickly grew. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment. A few interns wiped away tears. Even the opposing attorney gave a slow, solemn nod. As Kimo walked into the lobby afterward, his classmates, those who once mocked him, lined up to shake his hand. One of them, the same who had joked about lions and lizards, said quietly, I was wrong about you. We all were. Another added, you didn't just win the case. You reminded us what the law is supposed to mean. Outside the court, the press had already coined a headline that would run across the country the next morning. The Mango Tree Advocate. How a village boy changed the courtroom forever. That evening, Judge Mensah called Kimo into his chambers. No formal robe, no pretense. Just a man, humbled. I don't usually mentor, he said, but I'd be honoured to teach a mind like yours. Kimo nodded, still absorbing everything, still the same boy who read legal notes beside a janitor's mop bucket. As he left, waiting near the entrance was the widow's teenage son. In his hands, a carefully folded suit jacket and matching trousers. My father's, he said. He always wanted me to be a lawyer, but I think they were meant for you first. Kimo accepted the suit with reverence, not because of its fabric, but because of its meaning. He didn't become someone new that day. He simply became who he had always been, someone the world had finally decided to see. The sun burned gently over the fields as Kimo stepped off the rusted bus, the same one he'd taken years ago when he first left for the capital. The village hadn't changed much. The roads were still dusty, the wells still shallow, and the skies still wide and full of promise. But something felt different, something in the air. As he walked, word began to spread. "He's back," someone whispered. "From the city?" another asked. "No, from court." And by the time he reached the mango tree, a small crowd had gathered. Children ran beside him, barefoot and beaming, their chants rising like song. "Barrister Kimo! Barrister Kimo!" He smiled as he reached the base of the tree, the same spot where he once stood as a boy, with a stick in his hand, pretending to run a courtroom no one believed in. Now, a proper wooden bench stood there. A donated chalkboard leaned against the trunk. Shelves of books lined the wall of a tiny structure he had helped build just weeks before. This was no longer a game. It was the region's first free legal aid clinic.